Sean reached towards the rotting oilskin almost hesitantly, almost as if he feared what he might or might not find. He flipped one side of the oilskin away, paused, and flipped the other side over, exposing the long hidden contents. "Holy sh!" Sean gasped, stunned. Jack Bragg stood, bug-eyed, quickly making the sign of the cross and saying slowly in an awestruck voice, "Holy Mary, Mother of God." Jessie stood with her mouth hanging open. "Wow," was all she could manage. Abby stood composed quietly, not saying anything at first, trying to remember something from a forgotten story she had heard long ago. It finally clicked in her memory and she looked calmly at Sean. "Mosby's gold," she whispered. Sean looked up and held her gaze for a moment. Then slowly they both looked away, their eyes drawn to the package's contents sitting on the floor, seeming to glow with a life of its own. Under the unnaturally bright quartz lights, it sat there displaying the power it had held over man for centuries. A power that had made men go mad, kill, or leave their homes in search of it. A single bar of gold. "I think this calls for a drink," Jack Bragg said after a moment, his face breaking into a scruffy grin. They sat there quietly now in a circle on the floor, with the gold bar at the center. They all laughed, drank several rounds of beer in celebration, and passed the gold bar around, each commenting on its weight and the texture. They sat now with it covered, for when it was uncovered all they did was stare at it. "So tell me again about this so-called legend?" Sean asked Abby. He and Jack Bragg looked on anxiously, while Jessie sat there with seeming indifference, looking at the pictures and reading Myra's diary. It was full dark outside now, and the air was damp and chilled. No one seemed to notice but Abby, as she hugged her arms around herself and racked her brain trying to remember the details of the old legend. "It stops," Jessie blurted out, interrupting as Abby started to speak. They all looked at her, forgetting their question for a moment. Jessie looked up at each of them. "It stops. In January 1865. There's hardly anything in it," she read. "January 21st. Papa took a bad fall today. We fear his leg is broken. I wish Wilt were here. He'd know what to do. We are going to take him into Salem, to the dock, even though he does not wish it. Papa's a big man. It'll be hard for Mama and I and little Samuel to manage him. Wilt would be such a big help right now. I hope he returns soon. And that's it. Nothing more. The rest is blank." "You said the vase in the tent was filled with these? She must have picked up in another one," Sean observed. Jessie set the diary down and picked up the old photographs. "This must be Myra and Wilt," Jessie said, passing the photo around. When it got to Sean, he studied it closer this time. He saw a young couple. Her in a simple dress, seated demurely against the stone well with a young man standing at her side with his hand on her shoulder. He wore Confederate gray, with tall cavalry boots and a plume in his hat flowing over his shoulder, a bold, cocky look on his face. Sean was struck by how young they both looked. Almost children, he thought. "I think it's romantic," Jessie sighed, a dreamy look in her eye. She was a million miles away at the moment. Sean handed the picture back to Abby. "So what's the story?" he probed. Abby shook her head. "I'm trying to remember. It seems like there's 3 or 4 versions of it. No one could agree on how it should go, and there seemed to be no basis for it. So it just sort of died off. But I think it went something like this. Sometime in January 1865, Colonel Mosby and his men raided a wagon train in the Shenandoah Valley. One of the wagons was loaded down with gold bullion. They made their escape, but somehow misplaced all the gold, and it's never been seen since." "That sounds like so much bilge," Jack Bragg spat. Abby nodded her head in agreement. "That's version number 1. Number 2 goes something like, towards the last days of the war, Mosby and his men somehow managed to raid the gold. Some say it was divided up amongst his most loyal men, assuring their good fortune through reconstruction. Makes sense, I guess." Abby shrugged. "But nothing's ever been proven either way. Version number 3 is a lot like version number 1, except it doesn't actually have Mosby being present, just some of his men. But the Union Army denied ever having moved any gold through the Shenandoah then. And Mosby always denied any part of it, said it was so much hooey." "Not much of a legend," Jack Bragg gaffed, "if they can't even agree on who, what, or where." Well, you have to be familiar with Mosby's exploits. They pulled off some pretty amazing things during the last couple years of the war, Abby protested. There's one thing, Sean added. Now somebody's seen the gold, or at least part of it. They sat in silence for a time, each letting their imaginations run. Sean was the first to speak. My guess would be the story is true, in some weird variation of all three. Abby laughed. You don't really believe any of this, do you? She said, looking at Sean like he had a loose screw. I'll agree it sounds pretty far-fetched, but if it is, what's that? Sean asked, nodding his head to the lump underneath the oilskin in the middle of the floor. Aye, lass. All legends have some sort of basis. In fact, I could tell you 100 stories of buried treasure that seemed like bilge, but some of that there treasure be lying in wait, Jack Bragg said, his eyes wide. Maybe the letter from Colonel Mosby explains where the gold bar came from, Jesse added innocently. Or better yet, where the rest of it's hidden, Jack Braggs cackled. Maybe it's in one of the other diaries. She had to have picked up where this one left off, a wide-eyed Jesse said, getting caught up in the moment. I'll tell you what, Jack. Help Jess bring the valise with the diaries up, and Abby and I will try to unfold the note or map or whatever is supposed to go to Mosby, and see if we can solve this little mystery, Sean said with a gleam in his eye. Oh, you aren't seriously starting to believe this, are you? Abby said disbelievingly. Aye, he is, lassie. Look at the gleam in his eye. I've seen it before. You may as well help him, 'cause the only way you'll get him to stop is to prove him wrong beyond a shadow of a doubt, Jack Bragg said knowingly. Oh, all right, Abby huffed, rolling her eyes. Come on, Jack, Jessie said, jumping up. Let's get that valise. She looked excitedly over at Sean and Abby. This is just so cool, she said as she led Jack out the door. When they were alone, Abby looked hard at Sean. What's wrong? He asked, raising his eyebrows. Abby shook her head. I just never figured you for a flighty treasure hunter is all. She folded her arms over in the evening chill. Abby, I'm not a treasure hunter, but I do follow an opportunity when it's staring me in the face. Sean got up and retrieved the gold bar from the floor. It shone brightly in the quartz light. Here, take this, he said, extending it out to Abby. She took it from him, straining under its weight. See? It's real. I'm not asking you to help me look for something that isn't there. I'm just saying, let's see if we can find out where this came from. I mean, do you have any idea what that's worth? Sean asked. Abby shrugged, her eyes looking deep into the gold as if she were trying to see through it. I don't know. A lot, I guess. I hadn't really thought about it. She managed to break her eyes away from the alluring gold and looked into Sean's eyes. Well, think, Sean pushed. Gold's what? $400 an ounce? There's 16 ounces in a pound. What do you think that thing weighs? 27, maybe 28 pounds? Do your arithmetic, Abby. That thing in your hands that you don't think is there is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000. Abby's jaw dropped. The bullion all of a sudden seemed hot to the touch. I hadn't thought about it, she stammered. Well, think, Abby. If there's more laying around here somewhere, don't you think it's worth a look? At least a little look, Sean said with his eyebrows raised. Of course you're right, Abby said, embarrassed, color rising in her cheeks. It's just my conservative nature, I guess. 150,000? Who would guess? She shook her head slowly in wonder, then looked at Sean, a big grin spreading across her face. Sean smiled back, but asked, Okay, what's so funny all of a sudden? Abby just shook her head. And to think, I was feeling sorry for you, Murphy, and a little guilty about selling you this place. They laughed together, sharing the joke. We'll have to be careful unfolding that note, Abby pondered, or it's liable to just disintegrate. Sean nodded his head in agreement. Any ideas on how to go about it? He said, looking at the note on the bed with a serious look on his face. Like this for starters, Abby said, melting into his arms and pulling his head down to hers until their lips met in a long, passionate kiss. They had moved down to the large kitchen that had dominated the rear wing of the house. It was the only part that had been made livable so far. The old woman had seemed to live out of it in her last years, and it seemed like the logical place for Sean and Jack to begin their restoration efforts, for it needed the least amount of work. The massive stone fireplace at the far end of the room had only needed minor repairs, and the flue cleaned. They now had a fire going in it that took the chill from the air and warmed it pleasantly. The room was now barren except for the fireplace, a kitchen counter with an old pump and sink, a simple wooden table with 4 chairs, and 2 military-style cots with Sean's old footlocker at the foot of his. Jack Braggs's personal items were stuffed into an old sea bag on his cot. They had resurfaced the plank floor, patched plaster, wallpapered, and repaired the wainscoting on the lower walls. The room shone with military neatness. Sean continued to pace while Abby struggled to decipher the note and the crude map Wilt had wanted past to Colonel Mosby. Jesse pored over diary after diary, skimming quickly, trying to find any reference to Wilt, Mosby, or the gold. Jack Bragg sat on his bunk, drinking a fresh beer, watching Sean pace and trying to help him think. Okay, what do we got so far? Sean asked the room as he paced. Abby collected her thoughts for a moment before speaking, and massaged the bridge on her nose with her thumb and forefinger. She began slowly. Well, near as I can make out, Wilt and Myra were in love. Wilt somehow ended up with 2 other men in this wagon of gold. They were on their way to rendezvous with others, but had trouble with the wagon, so they hid the gold and continued on. Ended up here for the night, but no one was here. Why? Sean asked as he stopped pacing and looked at Abby. Abby returned his look and just shrugged her shoulders. Because Papa fell and broke his leg, and they took him to the dock in Salem, Jessie added, looking to the old diary, her voice excited by her perception. Sean looked confused for a moment. Salem? I don't recall a town near here named Salem, he said, looking back and forth between the women and Jack. Jack just shrugged and opened another beer. Abby answered, Salem is Marshall, Sean. They changed the name after the war to honor John Marshall, the first Chief of Justice of the Supreme Court. He used to live just outside of town. Oh, okay, that fits, Sean said as he started pacing again. That fits what? Abby asked, looking thoughtfully. The scenario I'm putting together, Sean stated as he paced. Okay, we know they came here, he replied. No one was home. They had taken Papa to Salem. Then for some reason, Wilt got cold feet. Had a feeling something was going sour. Then they're attacked here at the house and killed. But before, Wilt leaves a note and a gold bar. In haste, he scrolls a note to his sweetheart, telling her to give the package to Colonel Mosby, which is the note and a bar of gold, if anything happens to him. That's so romantic, Jessie said, sighing. That's so much bilge, Jack spoke up for the first time from his bunk. Why so, Jack? Sean countered, stopping to face his friend. Jack took a deep pull from his beer and belched loudly, patting his stomach before answering. If they hid the gold, laddie, Jack explained. What's this boy Wilt doing carrying that gold bar around? It's not like it'd be easy to hide. Yeah, Sean added. If they had one gold bar, they'd have been watching each other like hawks, and I doubt Wilt would have had the time to do all that in the heat of battle. I think the note explains that, you two, Abby said, looking back at the old paper. It says in one passage here, quote, the wagon had a bad wheel from the start, so we took all we could carry and still move on the quick, like to help lighten the load for the wagon. And if they overtook us and we had to leave the wagon, we would not come away empty-handed. Abby paused, then explained. So, it stands to reason, if they were all carrying their own share, Wilt could have hid the bar out of what he was carrying. Sean looked at Abby, and they both nodded in agreement with her logic. Okay, lassie, I'll give ye that point, but there's still so many questions. Like, where does that old paper say they hid the gold, huh? I'm not sure, Abby said, looking at the floor. There is a crude map, but the part where the X marks the spot crumbled when I unfolded the paper. He explains it in names and landmarks from almost 130 years ago. It will take some looking around to figure it out, but one thing I can tell you, it's not far. And he says if they still can't find it, Myra can show them. It says to tell her it's where he went to ground when he went to the Yankee fox hunt, and they thought he was a fox. She'll know where it'd be. That don't make sense, Jack Bragg scoffed. Well, nobody said it'd be easy, Jack, old boy, Sean beamed. He liked a challenge. If it was, the gold would have been found long ago. Maybe it was, Jessie retorted, or maybe the diary will tell us. Maybe it was, Sean agreed, but we'll never know unless we look. Who knows? He shrugged. I know one thing, Abby said, stepping into the conversation. It's late, and we're all tired. We need to knock it off for the night and look at it fresh after a good night's rest. I'll tell you what, Sean. Mama said to tell you the invitation to Sunday dinner was still open, and I was to drag you there if need be tomorrow. Why don't you and Jack come to dinner, and we can look at what we have. Maybe we'll think fresh. My brother will be there too. He's somewhat of an expert on Mosby. Maybe we can pick his brain. Mama, Jessie said sharply, I wouldn't tell Uncle Bobby about this. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. I don't either, sweetheart. But he knows a lot about the Civil War, especially locally. We can learn a lot from him without actually telling him we found gold. Actually, none of us should tell another soul till we know more, Sean demanded, looking at each one in turn. My lips are sealed, Sean, my boy. You know that, Jack vowed. Mine too, both women said in unison. Well, it's settled, and I'd be pleased to come to dinner tomorrow, Abby. What do you say, Jack? Sean questioned, turning to his old friend. Sounds good, but I have to be getting back to Norfolk tomorrow. Sean, you know that. I'm behind things as it is, and I'm taking in a big catch Monday morning to refit and sell. 60-footer she is. Got her for a song at auction. So if you want me back here for the weekend to start on the front rooms, I gotta be heading back in the morning. Sorry, Abby. I don't mean to be rude. That's okay, Jack, Abby said, smiling at the scruffy old man. Maybe we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone tomorrow. She brightened, turning back to Sean. What do you mean? Sean questioned. After dinner, we can bring Daddy out here and look at what you got in the tent. Abby finished pleased with herself for thinking of it. Come on, Jessie. We should be going, Abby said, getting up and heading towards the door with Jessie in tow. Until tomorrow, she said over her shoulder. Goodbye, Abby. Jessie. Nice to meet you both, Jack said, waving. Wait 1 minute, I'll walk you out, Sean said, then ducked out of the room. They heard him on the steps, and he was back in a minute and walked the ladies to Abby's car. Bye, Sean, Jessie said, moving to the passenger side to get in. Wait a sec, Jess. You too, Abby. Sean moved over to Jessie. Here, this is for you, he said, and placed Myra's old string of pearls around Jessie's neck. I thought they'd look good with that tan you've got. Jessie's jaw dropped. Oh, Mama, look, she said excitedly, rushing to Abby to show her, then rushed back to Sean. I can't take these. Thank you, but... Nonsense. What am I going to do with them? You take them. They look beautiful on you. Oh, thank you, Jessie beamed and jumped into Sean's arms and gave him a big hug. Sean moved over to Abby. That was very nice of you, Abby said, but you shouldn't have. Those are worth a lot of money, Abby chided him. Sean just shrugged and produced the brooch that had been in the strongbox and held it out to Abby. And this is for you, pretty lady, he said, moving closer and kissing Abby on the cheek. Sean, I can't accept this. He held up his hand and hushed her. Sure you can. Like I told Jessie, what am I going to do with it? And not to mention what you've done for me. Call it a token of my appreciation and gratitude. Well, I think I'll get in the car, Jessie said, opening the door and getting in, hinting loudly so they could have a little privacy. You shouldn't, Abby said, looking into his eyes. I want to, Sean said, kissing her full on the lips this time. Well, if you twist my arm, maybe, Abby said, breaking the kiss and melting completely into his arms for a much longer one. When they came up for air, Sean opened Abby's door politely. Well, it's settled then. Until tomorrow, he said, bowing gallantly. Thank you, Abby said, getting in. Until tomorrow. Sean closed the door, and Abby started the car. Sean watched them pull off into the darkness and waved. The horn honked as the car receded into the night. Until tomorrow, Sean whispered, and turned back to the house.